This is the voice of Nelly Sachs, winner of the 1966 Nobel Prize in Literature. Her poetry and plays give voice to victims and survivors of the Holocaust, expressing the horror while also offering hope. Nelly herself narrowly escaped Nazi Germany. Born into a well-off German Jewish family, Nelly lived a relatively sheltered early life. Her parents encouraged her artistic pursuits, especially dance and poetry. In Germany, she became a published poet who identified more with the German bourgeoisie than with her Jewish heritage until Hitler came to power in 1933, and her Jewish identity became all important. At 15, Nelly had initiated a correspondence with her literary idol, Selma Lagerlof, a Swedish Nobel Prize winner. This literary relationship probably saved Nelly's life. Having survived a traumatic interrogation by the Gestapo and the ransacking of her and her mother's apartment, Nelly, in 1940, when she was almost 50 years old, received an order to report to a Nazi labor camp. Just a week before she was to report, Nelly finally received a Swedish visa, thanks to a letter written by Selma Lagerlof to Swedish Prince Eugen. Nelly and her mother were on the last flight out of Berlin to Stockholm in 1940. Once in Stockholm, Nelly learned Swedish and earned a modest living, translating into German the poetry of several Swedish modernists, including Eric Lindegren. The work sustained her and also changed her own poetry forever. The poems she wrote as a refugee in Sweden are the ones she is known for today. Most have never heard of Sachs, despite this 2018 Google Doodle featuring the poet. Certainly, Sachs was unknown to me when Montgomery College professor asked us to find a poem suitable to be read at a Holocaust memorial event. He suggested several well-known male authors, including Paul Celan, who was particularly associated with the Holocaust. Searching the internet in hopes of finding a woman's voice, I soon became aware of Nelly Sachs, Celan's friend and correspondent. It turns out Sachs wrote hundreds of poems grappling with the deeply disturbing reality of the Holocaust. Once focused on Sachs, it was difficult to find her books. My internet research kept circling back to one resource, a blog devoted to Nelly Sachs, complete with more than 100 of her poems translated into English. This is the work of a Switzerland-based translator, Catherine Sommer. Sommer, born and educated in the UK, has over 30 years of experience performing technical translations to English from German and French for industrial clients. Yet her translations of Sachs are a labor of love. Today, it is my honor to introduce you to Catherine Sommer.
Hello.
Hello, Catherine.
Hello, Elly. And, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here today.
Catherine, I wanted to start by quoting you back to yourself. You wrote an essay about translation that you shared with me. And in it, you said, translating poems from French and German into English was an antidote to the nuts and bolts, shafts and gears of work that bought my daily bread. Can you tell us a little bit about the specifics of that nuts and bolts work that you were doing and why you needed an antidote?
Well, it's very simple. I needed to earn some money. I needed to earn my living. And although literary translation is very rewarding and very beautiful, the money is with business and industry. And they were the people who were prepared to pay for the translations to be done. I could make more money out of translating a couple of manuals for some textile machines being exported from Switzerland to India, or by interpreting at an AGM, than I could by doing all of the Nelly Sachs poems.
And tell us a little bit about how you discovered Nelly Sachs.
Yes, I was just going to say as well that translating prose is a very different thing from translating poetry. I discovered Nelly Sachs in the 80s, in the mid-80s. I came across a little poem in an anthology, In diesem Amethyst, which is very short, but very beautiful and mysterious. I'm still not 100% sure that I understand what it's all about 40 years later. I had never heard of her, and I searched for her, like you, even then. And I finally went to a bookshop and asked if they had anything, and they dug around and finally came up with, I've got it here, a little anthology, this one, Nelly Sachs Gedichte. And so I started to read those, and again, she is a difficult poet. She's a modernist, and she can be very abstract. But it was the amethyst that really got my attention in the first place.
Shall we share that with everyone so they can get a taste for Nelly Sachs?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. Catherine, would you read it to us in German and in English?
Yes, the German. In diesem Amethyst sind die Zeitalter der Nacht gelagert, und eine frühe Lichtintelligenz zündete die Schwermut an. Die war noch flüssig und weinte. Immer noch glänzt dein Sterben, hartes Veilchen. And in English, this amethyst holds all the eons of the night. For in the beginning a flash of intelligence kindled melancholy while it was still wet and wept. The fire of your dying lingers yet, hard violet. It's taken me a long time to get to that version, simple as it is.
Tell us a little bit about what makes that a characteristic Nelly Sachs poem.
Well, partly the way that it's so condensed, and the use of actually simple language. There are no poetic words as such. She has an invented word in that, Lichtintelligenz, which is again a typical thing. She invents words when they don't exist, but it's the way that the words are put together that makes it the juxtaposition of her words, and the implications, the association of the amethyst with the violet, the amethyst that has been formed under pressure in the earth for so many ages, so many millions of years. And then the comparison of that with a violet, which is very transient, has a very brief lifespan. And linking that with it, the fact that that melancholy comes into it, the sadness, yeah, maybe that violet color is a sad color. These are all things that evoke subconscious associations, I think, in the mind.
We're going to be coming back to some of the things you mentioned, for instance, the right words in the right order, when we talk more about the philosophy of translation. But I wanted to go back a little bit into the story. When you started, what was it that got you started with translating a multitude of these poems?
Okay, well, I had this little book, and as I looked through that, it was the early 90s, and Yugoslavia was a bit of a patchwork country, and it was falling apart, and there were horrible things being reported in the news, atrocities in the news, and we had quite a few refugees pouring into Switzerland. I was vaguely connected at that time with some of my students were ex-Yugoslav students. I was teaching at the time at the Dolmetscherschule in St. Gallen, and it struck me that many of the poems that Nelly Sachs had written about refugees were totally relevant to the situation at that time. And in fact, since then, I've also been involved with refugees through a church that I'm connected with here, an English-speaking church. We had a lot of refugees, particularly from Africa, in the early part of this new century, 21st century. And these poems they apply not only to the Holocaust, but they apply to any kind of persecuted or any kind of persecuted group of people or refugees of any kind. I thought that would be something that would perhaps help to raise consciousness among the general public. And so I started off translating the refugee poems and trying to spread them around. Problem is, Nelly Sachs is difficult to understand even in English. And I also sent off some to publishers, to a number of publishers, but it wasn't the right time for it. Nobody was interested.
Okay, let's go to one of those refugee poems and then come back to continue with your story.
Sure.
If someone comes. We will get there, I promise. Okay. Would you please read it for us? Maybe just in English?
English, yeah. If someone comes from far away with a language that maybe stifles sounds, with a mare's whinnying or the cheeping of blackbird nestlings, or even a screeching saw cutting proximity to pieces, if someone comes from far away, cringing like a dog or maybe like a rat in the wintertime, wrap him up warm. He might well have fire under the soles of his feet. He may have been riding on a meteor. Don't scold him if your carpet screams through its holes. A stranger always carries his home in his arms like an orphan, and maybe all he is looking for is a grave to bury it.
So this is the type of poem you were translating?
Yes, this is one of the early ones, yes, that I did. I didn't translate her poems in any specific order. I didn't have any plan in mind at the time. I just picked out those where I felt I could do something. I could put them into English, because there are still some that they are so difficult, they're practically untranslatable.
So not finding a publisher, what did you do?
Well, for a long time, nothing. For about 10 years, they just lay there. And then in 2011, I started a blog and started putting all sorts of things on the blog. And then I thought, by that time, I had about 30 poems. And I thought, oh, I'll put these onto the blog. So I did, on one page. And at that time, I had gone from Switzerland back to England. My mother was 95 at that time. I went back to look after her for the last 5 years of her life. So I had a lot of spare time on my hands. And I started translating a few more. And they then became too unwieldy for the blog, for one page on the blog. So then I started a second blog devoted entirely to Nelly Sachs, and added the poems one by one as I translated them. And yes, I've ended up with 140 altogether on that. And it's been more satisfying in a way, because with the blog, I can reach far more people. You know, if you publish poems in a book, yes, maybe people will buy the book and they'll read one here and one there and then put it away. I've had over 120,000 hits on that blog, so it's not doing too badly, and people are reading.
And one gets the sense that it's a living and breathing place, because you're still updating the poems. I'm
constantly updating. Yes, yes, I'm constantly updating and revising. So you know, so sometimes people refer to a particular one and I think, that could be better. In fact, that happened this week. I was asked if a lecturer in a German university, in Marburg University, could have permission to use my translation of Chorus of the Consolers. And she uses this. She's a psychiatrist, psychologist, theologian. She uses this dealing with traumatized clients in German. But the lecture that she was giving was in English, and they suddenly realized that they didn't have a translation of this poem in English, so could they use mine? And so I said, of course. And then afterwards I thought, there's a couple of lines in that could be improved. So I've slightly changed those this week. So yes, that is one advantage of, for me, that's an advantage. It's probably a nightmare for publishers if the author keeps coming back and wanting to change things. But for me, that is an advantage. I can improve, I can revise, I can add, yes.
And it sounds like you're in conversation with people all over the world.
Yes, it's surprising, actually. It's really surprising how many different countries, mainly English-speaking countries, but I see from the stats on the blog site that they are being read in China and Indonesia, Latin America, different countries of Europe, yes.
Catherine, I did find other translations when I was searching for a poem, but yours had a quality that it was hard to articulate what it was about them that just resonated with me. I wanted to talk about kinship. You speak about this. You said, I would contend that only a poetic person can really translate poetry. What is required is kinship of the soul, that mysterious affinity of spirit and sensitivity to the original writer's intention. I don't believe anyone can really identify with another. You can think yourself into a poem, but you can't fully think yourself into the poet. Can you talk to us about your kinship with Nelly Sachs and what the importance of that is for you?
Yeah, the German word is Seelenverwandtschaft. Yes, and I think kinship is probably the closest English word to that. I'm neither Jewish nor have I been persecuted, but the emotions that she evokes, I think, are universal. And as I said, I have had quite a lot of contact with refugees, and I've seen the trauma that they've gone through. I think to translate, you need to connect at this, is it a spiritual level? I suppose that is the nearest I could get to it. And it's when you're translating a poem, you want to be able to try to reproduce the effects of the original one. It's very difficult because there's the effects of the sound of the poem, there's the effects of the imagery and the metaphors that are in the poem, there's if there's any rhyme or meter or scansion or anything, and all of those things you need to have. As I said, some people say you have to be a poet. I don't know whether I can class myself as a poet, but I think you certainly need a poetic sensibility to be able to do that.
Yes. Tell us a little bit. So how do you even approach, I mean, how do you dare approach the poem? What is your process when you first start?
I read it aloud. I try to, sometimes there are recordings online. Nelly, you played an extract from Nelly Sachs yourself, speaking herself at the beginning. When she read her own poems, she read in a very monotonous way. But it's interesting all the same. There are certain intonations there that are meaningful, but there are also some very, very good readings by other people online. So I listen to it if I can. I listen to the effects of the sounds, and I visualize. She has a lot of, I'm a very visual person, and she has a lot of imagery, a lot of metaphors, which, yes, the famous quotation is, "My metaphors are my wounds." So her metaphors are the most important part of her poetry, I think. So I try to visualize those, and then I try to find the words in English that have the same effect, and that's the difficult bit. That's the challenge. And that's where translating poetry differs so much from prose. Because if I'm translating somebody's annual report for an AGM, the important thing is clarity. It isn't necessarily that it sounds harmonious and poetic. And as I said before, when we read The Amethyst, she uses very simple vocabulary. She doesn't, her vocabulary is not complicated. It's not highfalutin. And sometimes in English, you don't necessarily find exactly that. The exact word may not exist. I mean, one of her main themes is Sehnsucht. And Sehnsucht is a feeling of longing, yearning for something that's very distant, unattainable. And if we just say longing or yearning, it doesn't have the force of Sehnsucht. The word Sehn, the sound of Sehnsucht, for example, is very it's long drawn out. Where longing or yearning, even if you say yearning, it still doesn't have that feeling. And the second half of the word Sehnsucht, Sucht, is addiction. It's something that obsesses. It's a very strong word in German. And all her life, throughout her poetry, there is this longing, this yearning for something more beyond, something mystical, God, if you like, perhaps, or the lover that she lost. The the man that she loved was tortured to death before her eyes. So he is also unobtainable, unachievable. So I roll all these things around the individual elements, and then I get a gestalt, a whole, and try to put that into English without betraying her.
How do you know when you've got it?
Well, sometimes when I know I've got it, and these are the ones that I'm not going to go back and revise, I read it out aloud in English and I get goosebumps. If it gives me goosebumps, then I know I've got it.
I think we all can relate.
Because a lot of poetry does, there are things that are really so deep. So, yeah.
What you said about the word, the longing. Catherine Bauer, who's a scholar who wrote a beautiful scholarly article about Nelly Sachs, said that she expressed the refugee as a seeker filled with restless longing for community and God.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Yeah. We don't have in this particular PowerPoint presentation, we don't have her poem about the butterfly, but that starts off with Weltschöne Jenseits. What a beautiful, the word jenseits is the other side of anything, but it's anything that is beyond what we experience. So the butterfly is a symbol for the hereafter, for I've seen translations of this into English, and it says what beautiful aftermath. I've seen a translation that says what a beautiful beyond. I took the word hereafter because I thought that is closer to what is meant. It's this is the longing, this feeling of Sehnsucht, of longing she expresses. Yes, seeking.
Catherine, let's look more closely at one of the poems. We could either go to Prayer for the Dead Bridegroom, or Job, or Night You Balm to My Eyes. Which do you think?
Let's look at Job.
Okay. Just take me a second. Oh.
It's number 12.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at Job. Would you like to read it in both German and English?
Mhm. O du Windrose der Qualen, von Urzeitstürmen in immer andere Richtungen der Unwetter gerissen. Noch dein Süden heißt Einsamkeit. Wo du stehst, ist der Nabel der Schmerzen. Deine Augen sind tief in deinen Schädel gesunken, wie Höllentauben in der Nacht, die der Jäger blind herausholt. Deine Stimme ist stumm geworden, denn sie hat zu viel Warum gefragt. Zu den Würmern und Fischen ist deine Stimme eingegangen. Job, du hast alle Nachtwachen durchgeweint, aber einmal wird das Sternbild deines Blutes alle aufgehenden Sonnen erbleichen lassen. And in English, oh, you windrows of torment, torn by primeval storms in ever-changing directions of the tempests. Yet your south is loneliness. Where you stand is the navel of pain. Your eyes are sunk deep into your skull, like cave-dwelling doves in the night, brought out blind by the huntsman. Your voice is silenced from asking too many whys. To the worms and the fishes your voice has gone. Job, you have wept through all the watches of the night. But someday the star sign of your blood will outshine all the rising suns. This is pretty much a word-for-word translation, because why make it complicated when the simple works? But even so, the Job here stands. Obviously, this is one of the oldest books in the Bible, in the Old Testament. Job is, I think, a figure that everybody knows. He is a bewildered man. He's defenseless, helpless, suffering repeatedly, and that is also very much the Jew in the Shoah. He doesn't know why. He doesn't know where the next agonizing pain will strike, and he's struggling blindly in the dark. He's driven to silence. He has no more to say. His voice has disappeared. He's asked why so much that there is no, his questions are not answered. And yet, at the end, there is an assurance in an indefinite future of a glorious outcome. And while he represents the voice of the Holocaust, this Job, he is also the personification of all who suffer persecution. Someday, his blood will be like the Milky Way, and it will be brighter than all the suns that have ever risen. So there is this promise at the end of hope. That is basically the picture that this gives. And then there are like little miniatures here, windrows of torment. The Qualen, we talk about the sufferings of Job, and in the book of Job, and I looked up the exact chapter, 30:22, verse 22, Job complains, "You snatch me up and drive me before the wind, you toss me about in the storm." So this is actually a biblical image. And in the German, Urzeitstürmen in immer anderen Richtungen der Unwetter gerissen. The Urzeit is prehistory, primeval times. And Unwetter is a lovely word in German. Wetter is weather. Unwetter is unweather, hence storms. And this is plural here, so it's tempest, storms. And he is blown about, and it's not only the intensity of the storms, it's the windrows is an instrument for defining in which direction the wind is coming from if you're at sea. So here he is being buffeted around, and your south is loneliness. The south should be gentle, where the gentle breezes come from, and yet even that is loneliness. He stands perfectly alone. So yeah, I chose the word torment for the sufferings rather than sufferings, because that's such a cliche. Torture would have been another word for Qualen, but I thought torment, since I was using storm in the next line, there's an echo there. And there's an onomatopoeic quality throughout this first verse there with the storms in the German, so I hope that I've got it. And the picture of wo du stehst ist der Nabel der Schmerzen, where you stand is the navel of pain. He's right in the center of all possible pain and agony. And the navel is also, that's the umbilical cord, that's the link, if you like, to the universe from which Job came. So I left navel rather than hub or center for this for this particular image. And in the second verse, there is the picture of these blind doves dwelling in a cave, living in a cave. Again, I chose the word dwelling, cave dwelling doves, for the alliteration in that. Brought out blind by the huntsman. Sorry, my alliteration might be too obvious, but she has a lot of alliteration in this. I can't always use alliteration and assonance where she has used them. For example, she has Deine Stimme ist stumm geworden, which is your voice is silenced. I can't say, there's no way of giving the sounds of that in English. And the word Taube, the Höhlentauben, the doves, the word Taube in German is a homonym of the German word taub, which means deaf. So Job is not only, by implication, blind and mute, but he's also deaf. He's totally helpless. And then the third verse, she has to the worms and the fishes, your voice is gone. Deine Stimme ist eingegangen. Eingehen is literally to go in, but it's also to go in, to perish, to die. And she often uses the fish in her poetry as a symbol of the mute victim. After she was interrogated by the Gestapo, she said she couldn't speak for a week. Her voice had gone to the fishes. So like her, Job also has this. And the worms, that comes up in the book of Job. Job chapter 7 verses 4 to 6, he says, when I lie down, I think, how long before I get up? The night drags on and I toss and turn until dawn. My body is clothed with worms and scabs. My skin is broken and festering. So we have the weeping through all the watches of the night. I've seen a translation of this where they translated Nachtwachen as vigils, but that didn't even occur to me. That to me, Nachtwachen is the watches of the night. And I was informed very recently that this, in fact, is used in the Jewish litany, this term, the watches of the night, which I didn't know before. So yes, and one day the Sternbild is literally the star picture. It's a constellation, but the word constellation doesn't immediately conjure up pictures of stars for us in English, I think. So I left the star sign of your blood. Literally, this is the star sign of your blood will make all rising suns look pale. But I thought outshine was better. Does that help?
Oh, what a beautiful exploration. Thank you.
Also, I think the star sign, there is you can object to star sign that it sounds astrological. It has astrological connotations, but I still think it is better than constellation.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a sec to get back to some of these ideas. I think this is a good place to bring in some quotes if people will bear with me. And then I'd like to have you respond. Nelly Sachs said in a letter, these poems, despite their limitations, are trying to lift the terrible into the realm of transfiguration, as has always been and always will remain the task of all poetry in all times, from the Greek sagas up to the present day. And then we have I referred before to Catherine Bauer, a scholar of German. She claims that Nelly Sachs is a healer of the German language after the Holocaust, a poet whose work challenges the claim made by German philosopher Theodor Adorno that, quote, to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. Scholar Daniel Peterson points to the influence of Jewish mysticism on Sachs. The idea of a single divine language spoken before paradise was lost, now broken into pieces. This made Sachs want to translate or retranslate the world in this process, give back or give back again some of the divine origins and dimensions to language. Talk to us about this.
Yes. Well, if you think about German poetry before World War II, there was a tendency to romanticize and there were some poets who were less flowery, and so, but the idea that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, they had to find a new language. And Celan, of course, in his Todesfuge, the Death Fugue, where he talks about schwarze Milch, the black milk that they would drink, he has a whole new, that is the only way that you could write, that they could write poetry after Auschwitz. They had to find a new language. There is an expression in German, Trommellyrik, the lyric of the rubble, or rubble is it, Trommel. And language itself was being torn up. Nelly Sachs had most of her poems before the war. They were a lot of the same imagery, but they were rhyming and they were scanning, and they fit nicely into the constraints of sonnets or whatever form she was writing in. And all of these poems through the war and after the war are more or less in free verse. The syntax is very, very condensed, it's very tight. And it was they had to invent a new language, those who were writing poetry after Auschwitz.
Shall we look at Chorus of the Saved as an example?
Yes, that is a good example, yes.
Hold on a sec.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just read the English because the German is too long and not everyone understands it. Yes. We who are saved, out of whose hollow bones death has already fashioned his flutes, on whose sinews death has already drawn his bow, our bodies still complain with their crippled music. We who are saved still see the nooses looped for our necks, hanging in the blue air. Our dripping blood still fills the hourglass. We who are saved are still gnawed by worms of fear. Our star is buried in dust. We who are saved beg you, show us your sun, but slowly. Lead us step by step from star to star. Let us learn to live again, but softly. Otherwise, the song of a bird, the bucket filling at the well, might break open the weak seals of our pain and foam us away. We beg you, don't show us yet a dog that bites. We might crumble to dust before your eyes. What holds our web together? Our breath is gone. Out of midnight, our souls fled to him long before our bodies were saved in the arc of the moment. We who are saved, hold your hand. We recognize your eyes, but only the farewell holds us together. The farewell in the dust keeps us together with you. This is one of the refugee poems that I think is still so relevant. Yeah.
Do you think it's a good example of how she brings transfiguration in?
Yes, I think so. The terrible things, of course, if you think of the pictures at the time that Bergen-Belsen was liberated, the people who were starving there, I mean, they were basically skeletons with skin on. This image of death fashioning flutes out of their bones, the bones being hollow, and the sinews are so tight that, yeah, it's the image of drawing a bow across a violin. The nooses looped for the necks, the trauma that they have been through. It's these little pictures show how fragile they are, and then we have to learn, these people have to learn very gently to live again. I don't think that that this could have been written before the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, she holds out the harp, that the hope that that there will be we are saved, there will be a possibility of redemption. Nelly Sachs was always looking for reconciliation. She was not looking for retribution. She was not looking for revenge. She was looking for reconciliation. Always.
Healing. I wanted to save time for questions, but I wanted to end with a poem, O Nations of the Earth, which you pointed out is highly relevant today. We'll just skip to that one. Here it is. And we do have a friend of yours who's read it for us in the German. So Catherine Frohi, I think that's how you read. Okay, we'll see if the recording works.
Völker der Erde, ihr, die ihr euch mit der Kraft der unbekannten Gestirne umwickelt wie Garnrollen, die ihr näht und wieder auftrennt das Genähte, die ihr in die Sprachverwirrung steigt wie in Bienenkörbe, um im Süßen zu stechen und gestochen zu werden. Völker der Erde, zerstört nicht das Weltall der Worte, zerschneidet nicht mit den Messern des Hasses den Laut, der mit dem Atem zugleich geboren wurde. Völker der Erde, oh, dass nicht einer Tod meine, wenn er Leben sagt, und nicht einer Blut, wenn er Wege spricht. Völker der Erde, lasset die Worte an ihre Quelle, denn sie sind es, die die Horizonte in die wahren Himmel rücken können. Und mit ihrer abgewandten Seite wie eine Maske dahinter, die Nacht gähnt, die Sterne gebären helfen.
Shall I read it in English?
Please.
O nations of the earth, you who wrap yourselves in the might of unknown stars like balls of yarn, you who sew and then unpick the seams, you who climb into Babel as if into beehives to dip into the honey and be stung. O nations of the earth, do not destroy the cosmos of words. Do not slash with the knives of hatred the sound that was birthed with breath. O nations of the earth, let no one mean death when he says life, nor blood when he says cradle. O nations of the earth, leave words where they grow at their source, for only they can fit the horizons into place, into their real heavens. And on their dark sides, like a mask hiding the yawning night, help the stars to give birth.
Thank you, Catherine. I think we can take some questions now with some help from our technologically advanced people. And I did want to start with just one question, and that is, why do you think Nelly Sachs is not better known?
That's a good question. Yes, I don't know. She's difficult. Her work is difficult. And it's not always easy. She does present the terrible, and as she said in herself, you know, people miss the terrible. They just see they miss the transfiguration. They just see the terrible, and people have said to me, why do you want to translate these depressing poems? And I don't really find them depressing. As I said, she is looking for reconciliation, and there's usually hope. So I don't know why she isn't fashionable anymore. She is so relevant.
Thank you. So yes, if there is someone who can help us with the Q&A part, that would be great.
Thank you. Charlene will be reading the questions that she compiled during the presentation. So she will take, yeah. Charlene?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, ladies, very much for that beautiful presentation. I'll read the first question to you. How do you know you have arrived at a version of a translated poem or literary translation to share it with the public? Is it all gut feeling, or do you have an established process to arrive at a satisfactory version?
It's a mixture. It's a mixture of gut feeling and yeah, you can't. I don't think you can apply an external set of rules to poetry. I have the advantage of having been a teacher of literature for many years, as well as language. So that helps. But it's a very good question. How do you know when you've arrived? I don't think you ever do. And this is why I say one of the advantages of the blog is that I can go back and change things. I leave them, I do my translation, I leave it for a certain time, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. Then I come back to it and I read it again afresh, and I compare it with the original. I look at the effect that the original has. I look at the effect that I think my translation has. And then when I'm reasonably satisfied with it, then I post it, yeah. But gut feeling also has a lot to do with it, because there is the emotional reaction.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read the next question to you. How do you select what to translate? How do you get to that decision? Is there an exploration or selection phase?
Oh, yes. Yes, I had done about 80 of these poems, and I didn't find any more on the net. So then I bought Teile dich Nacht, which is one of it, and I thought, okay, I'll do these now in the order that they are in the book. And that did not work for the simple reason that there are some which I can't translate yet. They're still in the simmering phase. There are some which speak to me instantly, and I can more or less do them without too much difficulty. But there are others where the words just don't come in English. It just doesn't sound right in English. And I have to leave those for a while and then come back to them. And that's the reason, if you look at the blog, why the poems are in a very random order. If ever they were to be published, they would have to be sorted out into the order that they were published by Nelly Sachs.
Okay, thank you. The next one is half comment, half question. Thank you for your thoughtful, moving presentation. You said that you began translating the poems of Nelly Sachs when refugees from Yugoslavia began coming into Switzerland.
Yeah.
Is there an analogy to be made between what happens to the host country when it welcomes refugees and what happens to the host language when it engages in translation? For example, welcoming another's language or welcoming the stranger.
I don't really understand how that relates to Yugoslavia, because the Yugoslavian refugees that were coming into Switzerland, they spoke Serbian or Croat or whatever, and the host language here in Switzerland would be French or German or Italian. Can you clarify the question a little bit, please, Gina?
Yeah, so let me just read it one more time, this middle part here. It says, is there I'll take it from the Yugoslavia part. You said that you began translating the poems of Nelly Sachs when refugees from Yugoslavia began coming into Switzerland. Is there an analogy to be made between what happens to the host country when it welcomes refugees? For example, in your beautiful translation, if someone comes from far away, and what happens to the host language when it engages in translation? For example, welcomes another language, or to say, given the theme of this conference, welcomes the stranger.
I think Professor Kapipkian may have posed that question. Maybe if he can unmute himself, he can clarify it more.
I put you on the spot there. I'm thinking in particular of these poems which were written in German, because I haven't translated any from French or any other language, and I'm translating them into English. So the matter of host country, and I'm in a foreign country. I mean, I'm also in a sense in exile. I am British living in Switzerland. There's an exchange to. I don't know whether it affects the language, though. Nelly Sachs, yes, perhaps. Nelly Sachs herself was. She was in Sweden, and she translated the modernist Swedish poets into German. And that certainly had an effect on her own poetry, because you can see the difference in what she was writing before, while she was in Germany, and what came out afterwards. So there's an exchange. I think there are movements that are international, whether translators are involved in that, or whether it's a matter of people reading the poems in the original language and being influenced by them. I don't think I can give a satisfactory answer. If that is you, Professor,
Well, we talk a lot about here about the benefits of diversity. We have over 160 countries, and it's seen as an academic. It's meant to, it in of itself is an academic benefit. And in the ways you were saying, the language was somewhat healed, the German language by, and just wondered if there was some analogy to the language itself when it engages in translation at these far ends of language, that poetry, and a benefit, as it were, in the same way that we talk about many languages coming in, welcoming the stranger, as it were, if there was a benefit. But that was just a...
Yeah, no, I think probably it's the fact that, for instance, I couldn't translate the Job poem as a traditional English sonnet. So I had to translate that as close as I could to the original German. So that would have some effect on the way that the language is used.
Catherine, James asked a related question, I think. Has translating Nelly Sachs affected your own poetry?
Yes. Yes, it's affected me in many ways. I mean, first of all, awe, because I realized that my poetry could never ever achieve the heights that hers does, the heights and the depths that hers does. But yes, because it has also released me. I grew up in the the traditional English free verse, yes, to some extent, but mostly it has to rhyme, it has to scan, it has to ta 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 ta. And it freed me from that, yes. And it opened up a few themes, and it's opened up a few metaphors.
We only have about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to run through as many questions as I can quickly. Okay. Who does the hymn refer to in the chorus of the saved poem? I thought there must be some significance to him when it's capitalized. How do you show the significance of proper names in poetry?
Well, German capitalizes all nouns, so not just proper names. But in chorus of the saved, which I think I have here somewhere. No, I don't have it, but it's him. It's God that is referred to there, which is why I capitalized it in the English.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
She was a very devout. She was a believer. She wasn't an Orthodox believer, either Jewish or Christian, but she certainly was. She certainly had mystical and spiritual beliefs about God.
So on that same note, given your distinction between translating poetry and prose, is your translation of "we who are saved," is it possible to say while prose counts the number of the dead, the wounded, the displaced, poetry shifts our attention to the domain of the self that survives and the cost of that survival?
Oh, I like that. I like that. Prose, of course, it can be anything. It's not necessarily purely materialistic. And you can have prose poetry, that does exist. I would have to think for a long time about that one, and I'm afraid we only have a couple of minutes, so I'm stumped.
Okay, all right, next one. Can you comment on the words that are untranslatable? Is it possible to add words in English to come up with phrases that almost achieve the impossible?
Yes, I have invented some words. I gave the example of Sehnsucht. Well, then okay with you, we say longing. But there are some words which are untranslatable in themselves because they refer to something which in one language which exists consciously in one language and maybe not in another language. There's also the German word Schadenfreude, which has gone into English, which is being happy when you see somebody else suffering. We have the word gloating, but it's not the same thing. But there are sometimes words in poetry which, if you take the exact, well, there's never an exact equivalent. If you take the usual equivalent, don't always work. For example, in Nelly Sachs's poem, Oh, the Chimneys, or Die Schornsteine, she's talking about the chimneys of Auschwitz and other extermination camps, and refers to these camps as die Wohnungen des Todes, which is places where death resides, if you like, if you just want an explanation of what that means. Wohnung in German, most Germans live in apartments, not in individual houses. So Wohnung, the usual word would be apartment, or in British English, a flat. But it just doesn't fit in, to my mind. That doesn't fit in. If you can't talk about the apartments of death. It's I've said it before, the Grim Reaper living in a condo. No, that is not a picture that it conjures up. I've seen it translated as the quarters of death, the houses of death. The most sold published translation calls it the habitations of death. I find habitations is too highfalutin, too grandiose. So I called it the dwellings of death. That is sometimes the problem when you have a word, because the connotations of a word in one language are not the same as those in another language. You can take a simple example, the word bread, for instance. In America and in England, to some extent, you think of this white, soggy stuff that you make toast out of, you know. But if you say Brot in German, then you see a brown sourdough bread. If you say pain in French, you see a baguette, the light French baguette. Whatever country you're from, you see something different. Whatever language it is, you see something different. Even the word house in itself, you know, for a third world person is not the same as it is for a first world person.
We're going to end with, oh, I'm sorry. I'm just going to end with this question. Sorry, Elly, really quickly. Okay. I hope I can pronounce this correctly. Is the German Schischwitznit equivalent to the Portuguese Sassuede?
What's the German word?
Sehnsucht.
So, oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
Sehnsucht. Sehnsucht. Ah, my Portuguese is not is not up to it. Sehnsucht it's a very strong desire for it's almost it can be for a loved person, it can be for a loved place. It's almost feeling homesick. There is the idea, much more the idea of an obsession, of a suffering in the word Sehnsucht than there is in the English word yearning or longing. But it's also the sound of it in poetry. I think if you're just translating a normal prose passage, then you could quite happily put longing or yearning for Sehnsucht. But in a poem where you have Sehnsucht, I don't know if you can hear it, it's stronger. And the Portuguese word, I'm afraid I don't know.
Catherine, thank you. I don't know how to thank you so much for all the time and really for the work you've done with Nelly Sachs. And I hope this leads to more exposure, more access, and more antidote for everyone.
Yeah, well, the antidote is, yes, that's good. And the access, as I've said before, thank you very much for giving me this platform. I greatly appreciate it.